The moment I realized the guy was actually following us, he waved at me. Not a big wave, not an angry wave, just a small, casual wave through his windshield, like we'd known each other for years. The problem was, I'd never seen him before in my life. At least, I don't think I had. Looking back, there were probably a dozen moments before that where I should have realized something was wrong. But when you're on a road trip, you make excuses for things. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself it's a coincidence. You tell yourself the world isn't as weird as your imagination is making it seem. Unfortunately, sometimes it is. This happened about 4 years ago. My friend Ethan and I had planned a week-long road trip after college graduation. Nothing fancy. Neither of us had much money. The plan was basically to drive across a few states, hit some national parks, stay in cheap motels, and enjoy having absolutely no responsibilities for a little while. It sounded perfect, and honestly, for the first day, it was. We left early in the morning, grabbed coffee, made fun of each other's music choices, the usual stuff. By that afternoon, we'd already put a few hundred miles behind us. Everything felt normal, at least until our first gas stop. I remember pulling into a gas station somewhere in Pennsylvania. I couldn't tell you exactly where. One of those places right off the highway where half the customers are travelers. I was pumping gas when I noticed a dark SUV parked near the edge of the lot. Nothing unusual about that. The thing I noticed was the driver. He was just sitting there, not pumping gas, not going inside, just sitting in the driver's seat watching the parking lot. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People sit in their cars all the time. Maybe he was on his phone. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was taking a nap. Who knows? I paid for the gas, grabbed a drink, and got back on the road. That should have been the end of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't. About 2 hours later, Ethan pointed something out. Hey, isn't that the same SUV? I glanced in the mirror. Sure enough, there was a dark SUV a few cars behind us. I laughed. There are probably a million dark SUVs. Ethan shrugged. Yeah, probably. And honestly, he was probably right. The highway was packed. The odds of seeing the same vehicle again weren't exactly impossible. Still, something about it stuck in the back of my mind. A little later, we stopped for food. Guess who was parked in the same lot? The SUV. Again. Now, that doesn't sound like much. But road trips are weird. People stop at different exits, different restaurants, different gas stations, different rest areas. The fact that we'd cross paths again felt strange. Not alarming, just strange. I remember joking about it while we ate. Ethan even named the guy. We started calling him SUV Guy. We figured we'd probably never see him again. 20 minutes later, he pulled out of the parking lot right behind us. That's when things got a little weird. Really weird. For the next hour, he stayed behind us. Not right behind us, just close enough. If I switched lanes, eventually he switched lanes. If I slowed down, he'd slow down. If I sped up, he'd speed up. Still, I kept making excuses. Maybe we were just heading the same direction. It's a highway. That happens. The problem was Ethan was starting to get uncomfortable. I could tell. Every few minutes he'd look back. Then he'd look at me. Then he'd say, "Dude, he's still there. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't we just pull over?" Honestly, because neither of us truly believed we were being followed. Not yet. We thought we were being paranoid. And nobody wants to be the person freaking out over nothing. A few hours later, we stopped at a rest area. The SUV pulled in too. That got our attention. I remember sitting in the car watching him. The guy didn't get out immediately. He just sat there, looking forward, hands on the steering wheel, completely still. Then he finally stepped out, middle-aged, maybe late 40s. Baseball cap, gray jacket, normal-looking guy. That was almost the creepiest part. There was nothing obviously wrong with him. Nothing that screamed danger. He looked like somebody's dad, somebody's uncle, some random guy you'd pass in a grocery store. As we walked toward the building, he looked directly at us, then smiled. Not a friendly smile, not an aggressive smile, just enough to acknowledge us. And for some reason, that bothered me. A lot. We got back on the road after about 10 minutes. The SUV left shortly afterward. Ethan finally said what we'd both been thinking. "You think he's following us?" I immediately shook my head. "No." Then I paused. Probably not. Deep down, though, I wasn't so sure anymore. About an hour later, we decided to test it. Nothing dramatic. We simply took an exit we didn't need. There was a small town nearby. No tourist attractions. No major highway connection. No reason for a random traveler to go there. We drove into town, made a few turns, passed through a residential area, then headed back toward the highway. The SUV followed every turn, every single one. At that point, the coincidence explanation disappeared. I remember looking at Ethan. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds, because suddenly the situation felt very real. Then things got worse. A lot worse. We pulled into another gas station. This time, the SUV stayed across the street. Just parked, watching, not hiding, not pretending, just sitting there. And that's when something happened that still bothers me. The driver rolled down his window. Then he waved. The same small wave. The same casual smile. Like we were friends. Like this was normal. And for the first time all day, I genuinely felt afraid. Because people don't accidentally follow someone across multiple states. People don't accidentally follow them through random towns. People don't accidentally sit across the street watching them. The problem was, we still had no idea why he was doing it. And we were about to find out. What happened next completely changed the rest of that trip. The weirdest part wasn't the gas station. The weirdest part was that none of US could find it again afterward. Not on Google Maps. Not on satellite images. Not on any map of the highway. Nothing. It was like the place had never existed. And honestly, if I had been alone, I probably would have convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. The only reason I know it happened is because 3 other people were there with me. And they remember it too. This happened during a road trip my junior year of college. There were 4 of us in total. Me, my friend Jake, his girlfriend Lauren, and another friend named Chris. We'd rented a cabin for a long weekend and were driving back home late Sunday night. The trip had gone great. Nothing weird, nothing dramatic. Just hiking, fishing, sitting around a fire, and eating way too much junk food. By the time we started heading home, everyone was exhausted. The plan was simple. Drive straight through. Get home around midnight. Sleep. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to plan. Around 10 p.m., we were driving through a pretty remote stretch of highway. The kind where you can go 20 minutes without seeing another car. At first, nobody noticed anything was wrong. Then Jake looked down at the fuel gauge. We've got a problem. I leaned forward from the back seat. The needle was almost empty. Really empty. Apparently, he'd assumed we'd stop earlier. Apparently, everyone else assumed the same thing. Nobody had actually checked. At first, we weren't worried. Every highway has gas stations. At least that's what we thought. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. 15 minutes. Nothing. 20 minutes. Still nothing. The road was getting darker. The traffic was disappearing. And the fuel needle kept dropping. Eventually, Lauren pulled out her phone. No signal. Chris checked his. Nothing. Mine too. Nothing. Not even 1 bar. Which was weird. Really weird. Because we weren't exactly in the middle of nowhere. At least we didn't think we were. Jake kept driving. What else could we do? The conversation in the car got noticeably quieter. Nobody wanted to say it. But we were all thinking the same thing. If the car ran out of gas, we were screwed. Then finally we saw it. A glowing sign in the distance. Gas. I don't think I've ever been happier to see a gas station in my life. The place looked old. Really old. One of those small roadside stations that looks like it hasn't changed in 30 years. Only 2 pumps. A tiny building. A flickering sign. Nothing special. At the time, it just felt like a lifesaver. Jake pulled in immediately. The first thing I noticed was how empty everything felt. Not deserted, just quiet. There were a couple of vehicles parked near the building. An old pickup truck, all faulted sedan. No customers, no movement, no sounds except the hum of the lights. I remember stepping out and stretching my legs. The second I did, I got a weird feeling. Not fear exactly, just a sense that something was off. Have you ever walked into a place and immediately felt like you didn't belong there? That's what it felt like. Jake started pumping gas while the rest of us headed inside. The bell above the door jingled when we entered. The store was tiny. A few shelves, a cooler, some snacks, the usual stuff. But there was something strange about it. Nobody was talking. Not the cashier. Not the two people standing near the back. Nobody. The entire place felt frozen, like we'd interrupted something. The cashier looked up. For a second, he just stared. Then he smiled. Long drive. I remember being relieved to hear somebody speak. Yeah, heading home. He nodded slowly, then said, "Not many people take this road anymore." Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. I couldn't explain why. At the time, I figured I was just tired. We grabbed drinks and snacks. Nothing unusual, at least not yet. Then Chris noticed something, a map hanging on the wall behind the register. He pointed at it. That's weird. I looked over. The map showed local roads, towns, highways, the usual, except our highway wasn't on it. Not even close. We joked that the map was probably ancient. The cashier laughed, but his laugh sounded forced, like he wanted us to stop asking questions. Looking back, that should have been my first clue. We paid and headed outside. Jake had finished filling the tank. Everyone climbed back into the car, and that's when Lauren noticed something. The vehicles we'd seen when we arrived, the pickup truck and the sedan, both were empty. No drivers, no passengers, nobody anywhere. Now, that's not scary by itself, but we've been there nearly 15 minutes. Nobody had entered the store. Nobody had left. The vehicles were just sitting there, completely abandoned. Chris even made a joke about it. Something about a horror movie. We laughed. Then we left. For about 20 minutes, everything felt normal. Then Jake checked the GPS. No signal. Still, not surprising. Except the road we were on wasn't appearing either. The screen showed us driving through empty space. No highway. No route. Nothing. The GPS simply couldn't find where we were. That got everybody's attention. Fast. We started looking for road signs. Anything. Eventually we found one. A small green highway marker. Jake slowed down so we could read it. The number wasn't the highway we'd been driving on earlier. It wasn't even close. We'd somehow ended up on a completely different road. Nobody could explain how. There hadn't been any turns. No exits. Nothing. Just miles of straight highway. And yet somehow we were somewhere else. The moment phone service finally returned, Lauren searched for the gas station. Nothing. Chris searched. Nothing. Jake searched. Nothing. No gas station. No business listing. No reviews. No record. Nothing. At first, we thought we were spelling the name wrong. Then we realized none of us actually remembered the name. Which sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Every single one of us remembered the building, the pumps, the cashier, the map, the sign, yet none of us could remember the station's name. Not one word of it. Eventually, we got home and moved on. Mostly. Every once in a while, the story would come up, usually at parties. People would laugh, assume we were exaggerating. Maybe we were. I honestly don't know. But about a year later, Jake sent me something. An old newspaper article he'd found while researching the area. According to the article, there had been a gas station near that stretch of highway decades earlier. It had closed sometime in the 1980s. The location matched almost exactly where we'd stopped. The article even included a photograph. And when I saw it, I got chills because it looked exactly like the place we'd visited. The same pumps, the same building, the same sign. The only problem was, the photo had been taken nearly 40 years before our road trip. The first time we heard screaming from the room next door, I almost called the police. Looking back, I wish I had, because if I had, we probably would have left right then and there. Instead, we stayed. And what happened later that night is the reason I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. This happened during a road trip I took with my older brother, Matt. We were driving across the country to help him move for a new job. Nothing exciting, just two brothers spending way too many hours in a car together. By the second day, we'd already driven for nearly 12 hours. We were exhausted. The plan had been to reach a larger city before stopping for the night. Unfortunately, around 11 p.m., we were both struggling to stay awake. Matt finally looked at me and said, "I need sleep." Like right now. I agreed. We started looking for somewhere to stay. The problem was that we were in the middle of nowhere. No major hotels. No chain motels. Nothing. Then we saw a sign. A small roadside motel just off the highway. The kind of place you'd never choose unless you had to. At that point, we had to. The parking lot was mostly empty. Maybe 4 or 5 vehicles. The office was still open. A tired-looking woman checked us in without saying much. She handed us a key. Actual metal key. Not a key card, which already made the place feel older than it probably was. The room itself wasn't terrible. Not great. Just old. The carpet looked ancient. The furniture didn't match. The air conditioner sounded like it was trying to die, but it was clean enough. And honestly, we were too tired to care. We brought our bags inside, ordered some food, watched TV, normal stuff. For about an hour, everything was fine. Then we heard the scream. It came from the room next door. A woman, loud, terrified, the kind of scream that instantly gets your attention. Matt muted the TV. We both listened. Silence. Then a man's voice. Too muffled to understand. Then silence again. I remember looking at Matt. Should we call somebody? He shrugged. Let's wait a minute. Which seemed reasonable. People argue. People fight. Hotels hear weird stuff all the time. A few minutes passed. Nothing. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it was probably a domestic argument. Not great, but not necessarily an emergency. Then things got weird. Really weird. About 20 minutes later, I stepped outside to grab something from the car. As I walked past the neighboring room, I noticed something. The curtains were open. The room was completely dark and completely empty. No lagi, no lights, nothing. At first, I assumed whoever had been there left. Maybe after the argument. Maybe before. I didn't think much of it until I got back inside and told Matt. He immediately frowned. That doesn't make sense. He was right. We'd heard screaming less than 30 minutes earlier. How could the room already be empty? We brushed it off. Again, looking back, that's a pattern in most horror stories. You keep finding reasons not to worry. Because the alternative is admitting something feels wrong. Around midnight, we finally went to bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly. Then I woke up. I don't know what time it was. Maybe 2 a.m. Maybe later. The room was dark. The TV was off. Everything was quiet, except for one thing. Footsteps. Right outside our door. Slow footsteps. Walking back and forth. Back and forth. Back and forth. At first I thought it was another guest. Then I realized they weren't going anywhere. They were just pacing. I sat up and listened. The footsteps continued. A minute passed. Then another. Then another. Eventually, Matt woke up too. You hear that? I nodded. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The pacing continued. Then it stopped. Right outside our door. Silence. Complete silence. I remember staring toward the door. Waiting. Listening. Then came 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Knock. 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 Neither of us moved. I checked the clock. 2 Uhr 17 a.m. Nobody should have been knocking on our door, especially not after pacing outside for several minutes. The knocking came again, this time harder. Matt got out of bed and quietly walked toward the peephole. I whispered, "Can you see anybody?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he stepped back. His face had gone pale. Actually pale. The kind of pale that instantly makes your stomach drop. "What? What is it?" Matt looked at me, then back at the door, then said, "There's a guy standing there." I waited. Okay, Matt swallowed. He's just standing there. That didn't sound great, but it wasn't terrifying. Not yet. Then Matt added, "He's looking directly into the peephole." Every hair on my arms stood up. The man somehow knew somebody was watching him, and he wanted us to know he knew. The knocking stopped. The footsteps returned. Slow. Back and forth. Back and forth. For another 10 minutes. Then, eventually, silence. Neither of us slept much after that. The second the sun came up, we packed our things and headed to the office. The woman working the desk was different from the one we'd seen earlier. Before checking out, Matt asked her something. Who was staying in a room next to us last night? The woman looked confused. Nobody. We both laughed. Not because it was funny, because we genuinely thought she misunderstood. Matt explained the screaming, the pacing, the knocking, everything. The woman's expression changed. Not scared, just uncomfortable. Then she said something that still bothers me. That room isn't being rented right now. She pointed toward the room. The plumbing's been broken for months. Neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, we left. And honestly, for years, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe somebody had used the room anyway. Maybe somebody was hiding there. Maybe there was another guest wandering around. Maybe. The problem was what happened next. A few weeks later, I left a review mentioning the incident. Nothing dramatic, just describing what we'd experienced. A day later, the motel owner replied. According to him, several guests had previously reported hearing arguments, screaming, and footsteps near that same room. The room that supposedly wasn't occupied. The room that supposedly wasn't even usable. I still don't know what we heard that night. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Because the thing I remember most isn't the screaming. It isn't the pacing. It isn't even the knocking. It's the look on my brother's face after he checked the peephole. Because I've known him my entire life. I've seen him angry. I've seen him hurt. I've seen him scared. But I'd never seen him look genuinely terrified. Until that night. If you enjoyed this vid, be sure to subscribe for more.